Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to continue on along the lines of reform to government, and this time I want to discuss a constitutional convention. Many amendments to the Pennsylvania Constitution are proposed during every legislative session. Do you think it's time to convene a constitutional convention? Why or why not? And the first response goes to John.
I do believe we have to embark upon a new constitutional convention. I think it's important because there is a popular interest in doing so, and I think that the legislature needs to hear the voice of the people. I think that the problem in Harrisburg right now with respect specifically to a constitutional convention is that neither side trusts the other, that the protocols and the processes by which it could be conducted are going to be nonpartisan or not favoring one side of the aisle over the other. And the key to having an appropriate constitutional convention is for, again, an independent set of stakeholders to essentially articulate the process by which it would be convened, who would participate in it, and what issues would be discussed and decisions rendered in a constitutional convention. I actually favor the process to get an independent set of protocols down so that neither side would be suspect of the other and the actual process can go forward. If we're all sitting out here waiting for a new constitutional convention to deal with the administrative deficiencies or the obsolescence of our current General Assembly, the only way it's going to happen is if legislation gets adopted. And that can't happen if either side of the aisle is suspect about the motives of the other in terms of how that constitutional convention gets convened. So I think what needs to happen is that the voice of the people needs to be articulated in a commission to come back to the General Assembly with recommendations on the protocols for a constitutional convention, and then and only then will we be fortunate enough to see legislation to embark upon it.
Frank.
The situation in Harrisburg is brinksmanship. You're right, both sides of the aisle. Constitutional convention is overdue. There's been talk about it, and it's a nice campaign issue. But what happens when you get to Harrisburg? If you're going to Harrisburg to go along, to get along, if you're going to Harrisburg to be part of the crowd, the good old boy system, the good old system, I'll leave gender out of it, then the Constitutional Convention will never come to be. It will never come to pass. The Constitutional Convention should be called on issues to, first one, eliminate property taxes. It's very hard to legislate a law. You need to open up the state's constitution. Ballot access. How about putting, how about giving the people of Pennsylvania ballot capability, where if there's an issue, we put it on the ballot. We don't have that right. We couldn't recall our governor like California did with Gray Davis because we're denied ballot access. So a constitutional convention absolutely is long overdue and critical. And at some point, it's dangerous. Because as we open that Constitution, if we don't make the right decisions, if we don't have the right people in Harrisburg, then theoretically and most likely, we could end up in a worse position than we are right now. But it's great that people are talking about it. In these circumstances, we need to get fully educated and understand that this could happen, it should happen, but we the people have to drive it, and it can happen in this election.
John, any response to that?
No.
Okay. We're going to move on now to redistricting reform. And Frank, you'll be the first respondent. Do you support amending the Pennsylvania Constitution to change the system for reapportionment and redistricting? And what changes would you recommend?
Well, first off, you've heard of the term gerrymandering. If you take a look at the 114th district that Jim Wansack currently serves and that Sid Michaels and Dan Naylor are vying for, you know what? How can you be an effective legislator when that area is so disproportionately cut up? Same thing in Monroe County. Monroe County has 5 senators. It is piecemeal. Monroe County is basically sacrificed now, along with cutting the size of the state legislature, 50 senators and 203 state representatives. We could easily redistrict and reapportion these districts so the people get representation. Right now, it's a power grab. It's a scheme that is not working from what I could tell. So do I support that? Yes. Can it be done? Yes. Does it take political will? Absolutely.
John?
The redistricting process, as currently articulated in the Constitution, requires each of the legislative caucuses to appoint membership, and then for those four to select a fifth. I actually don't disagree at all with Frank on the issue of it not being the best process. That the fact of the matter is that the Constitution, as it's set up right now, allows the very legislators who are serving their political interests to have a very strong arm in how the lines get drawn. And Frank's examples of how those lines get drawn, perhaps not necessarily considering the equity, right, of the population that they're serving, has, as he indicated from the old term at the federal level, gerrymandering implications. The issue for me has to do with whether or not we can open up the Constitution to reconsider this process. There is a mathematical logarithm that we can put out right now that would define a population distribution completely ignorant of party, completely ignorant of any other matter, and it would essentially define the lines of population with some respect to subdivisions and borders of municipalities. And this is an issue for representation, as my opponent mentioned up in Monroe County. One of the reasons in our 22nd district that we're currently running for office, Monroe County feels disenfranchised by the sheer fragmentation of representation that they have. So I think that we need to think carefully how we would correct the system. But I also think that the only way it's going to be corrected into a new means by which we can redraw these lines. And by the way, redistricting is coming up in 2011 as a result of the census this year, is to redefine the rules by which we draw them. And the only way that can happen is by revisiting the Constitution.
Frank, do you have any rebuttal for that?
Just that Harrisburg is broken and the state, correct myself, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we the people suffer.
And I would add, from a league perspective, it's too late, actually, to amend the Constitution for this next round of redistricting. It takes about 2 years for a constitutional amendment to go through the Pennsylvania process, which is incredibly difficult, and we are beyond the time that can occur. So we'd be looking for legislation that would perhaps prescribe some of the issues that pertain to reapportionment, but it's actually impossible for us to pass a constitutional amendment for this round. We all as citizens need to work on redistricting for 2020.
So Andrea, I take it that's an issue, agenda item for the League of Women Voters?
Absolutely.
You could see that, but Harrisburg can't.